Thank you for joining me on the journey. This is Completed Christianity. So welcome back. Another episode of Being Complete. And today is fifth day, what they say. And we're going to continue on with this video that we've been dealing with Ray Comfort. And again, Ray Comfort, the interviews and things that he does, that's great. This is a problem. But it's a conventional and a traditional problem that stems back to the Dark Ages, to Catholic doctrines that never got ferreted out in the Reformation, and so that's where we are today. We're still coming back to the Father's ways, to the Father's word. So let's jump over here, take a look at our video.
Thirdly, Paul's custom to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. Let's look at why Paul, as a believer in Jesus, went to synagogues on the Sabbath. Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus, whom I preach to you, is the Christ." And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks.
So he's basically going to go on and say that the reason Paul does this is because he loves his people and he wants to reach them with the gospel. But as we've mentioned before, I believe, that notice here it says Jews and Greeks. So the Greeks are in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Okay? There are Greeks in the synagogue on the Sabbath. It's not just Jews.
Paul loved his people and had a burning passion to reach them with the gospel. He therefore went to the synagogue on the Sabbath to reason with the Jews about Jesus being the Christ, to maintain that he went there to keep the law.
So he wants to reason with them. So here, I'll take. So he's saying that the only reason he goes to the synagogue is to reason with them, to reach them, because he loves his people. So it says here, this is Acts 13:42, and when the Yahudim, Jews, went into the congregation, which this word congregation is synagogue, the nations or Gentiles begged to have these words spoken to them the next Sabbath. So if they were already keeping Sunday, that this is, quote, the Lord's Day, which in Scripture, like in Revelation, in King James it says that Lord's Day, it's talking about the Shabbat. That's the day. He's the master or Lord of the Sabbath, not Sunday. And so he went out of so they begged these words be spoken to them the next Sabbath. So why not the next day? Oh, hey, we all meet all us Christians, all you Christians, you meet on Sunday. Let's get this going tomorrow. No, that wasn't the case. It was so they begged that it would be the next Sabbath. And when the meeting of the congregation had broken up, many of the Yahudim, Jews, and the worshiping converts, Gentiles, followed Saul and Barnabas, who, speaking to them, were urging them to continue in the favor of the Mighty One. So these Jews and these Greeks, these Gentiles, they liked what they heard, and they urged them to continue doing what they're doing. And on the next Sabbath, so not Sunday, not the next day, the next Sabbath, almost all the city came together to hear the word. So it's not just doing this just because that's when the Jews come to the synagogue. That's not what's happening. And here's another point of this. And Paul, came to Ephesus and left them there, Priscilla and Aquila. But he himself went into the synagogue word congregation is synagogue, and reasoned with the Yahudim. And when they asked him to stay longer with them, he declined. So he's already with his people in Ephesus, the Jews in Ephesus. He's already with them. He's there. He's got their attention. They're asking him to give them more, and he's like, yeah, no. But he took leave of them, saying, I have to keep this coming festival in Jerusalem, by all means. But I shall come back to you, the mighty one desiring so, or the mighty one willing. And he sailed from Ephesus. And so right here, these Jews are asking him, hey, stay here in Ephesus with us and teach us some more. But he's like, no, I got to keep this feast. So what evangelist, what apostle, so-called, or preacher, prophet, so-called, these days, when somebody's like, hey, give us more, they're like, no, I got to go keep a feast. And the counter to this that some will say is like, well, he was just going there because people from all the nations come there, and so he was going there to meet with the people from all the nations to preach the gospel. Well, he's already been to all the nations and preaching the gospel. He is in the nations right here preaching the gospel, but he's given that up because his heart is to keep the feast, which would be the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. So, let this continue on.
Flies in the face and Greeks. Paul loved his people and had a burning passion to reach them with the gospel. He therefore went to the synagogue on the Sabbath to reason with the Jews about Jesus being the Christ. To maintain that he went there to keep the law flies in the face of the entire book of Galatians.
To maintain that he went there to keep the Sabbath flies in the face of the whole book of Galatians. No, it doesn't. It does not. And we did a whole commentary on the book of Galatians. Go to our playlist section here and on the channel, and you'll find that playlist where I go through the whole book of Galatians. It doesn't fly in the face of the book of Galatians. It flies in the face of man's teaching on the book of Galatians. It flies in the face of the doctrines and traditions of men.
Look at the day the disciples gathered together to break bread, to fellowship, and to open the scriptures. Now on the first day of the week, Sunday, when we were gathered together to break bread, share communion, Paul began talking with them, intending to leave the next day, and he kept on with his message until midnight.
Okay, so now on the first day of the week, Sunday. So this is the main proof text that the Sabbath is changed to Sunday. For all of the traditional Christianity, this is the main proof text. It's on the first day of the week. Paul preached on the first day of the week. That's Sunday. That means that the Christian Sabbath is now Sunday. I mean, this is the weakest argument ever, but this is what they hold to. And we're going to see this argument become even more weak and just flat erroneous. And we've dealt with this before and shown this before. So, first day of the week, right here, this is the Greek, hais ho sabbaton. So, right down here, hais ho sabbaton. So, first day of the week. And you notice, day, this word's just added. So, first, hais ho sabbaton. So, what do you think sabbaton means? It means the Sabbath. So, when we go over here to hais, we'll notice that this is how this word is translated. It's translated 229 times, and then it's translated a and other and some, and then 4 times it's not translated. So where does the word first fall in here? It's in this miscellaneous where it's translated various things 18 times in other places, and this is one of them, and it's just translated as first to perpetuate this doctrine that it's Sunday. So because it's not, if you change it to 1, then it's one day of the week, not the first day of the week. It's just one day, or one of the days, one of the Sabbath. So this is the problem, where this becomes way more weak. And when you take a look over here, the word first, it's proton. So proton is first, heis is one. So when we look at the when you go and you look at this, like right before he makes this statement, okay, over here, go over here. So right before he makes this statement, Acts 20, up on the first day of the week, okay, it has day italicized there, which says that word's just been added. So it says, on 20 verse 6, it says, we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. So again, why even mention this if the feast days are done away with? We don't do that sort of stuff anymore. But we just saw in that other quote, he's leaving Jews that want to hear the gospel. He's leaving them to go keep a feast day. They're asking him to stay, preach the gospel, and he's like, no, I got to go keep a feast. Here we have him mentioning another feast. So after the days of unleavened bread, they came to Troas in 5 days, and where they abode 7 days. And this thing like when you're a Sabbath keeper, you're always trying to work things around the Sabbath. We have a vacation coming up later in the year, and we've been, us and another family member, Sabbath keepers, and so we keep trying to figure out how to work out travel days so that you're not traveling on the Sabbath and not checking in or checking out on the Sabbath and all of this stuff, and try and work all this together and get it to where the week works out and the timing works out and the days off work out and all those things to work everything around the Sabbath. Well, that's what's going on here. So it was and it says down here, Paul preached unto them, verse 20, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow. So the day after, so he's staying on the Sabbath. The day after, he's going to travel. And he travels 5 days and then stays 7 days. So that seventh day would have been Shabbat, and then the next day, then they're moving on. So he's doing the same thing. He's trying to work his schedule around the Shabbat. And so up on the first day of the week. So these weeks after the days of unleavened bread, you have 7 weeks. Count 7 Sabbath. These are the Feast of Weeks. These are special weeks. This is the context after the days of unleavened bread. And then he comes up here and he says, and upon one of the Sabbaths. So there's seven Sabbaths. After the days of unleavened bread, you count 7 Sabbaths. Well, he's like on one of the Sabbaths, or one, or meaning one as in first of the Sabbath. Even still, you could, but he's saying on one of the Sabbaths. Is when he's preaching this. So it's not first day of the week. It's one of the Sabbaths. And where we have Heis Host Sabbaton here is really plural. And so, move on with this.
If we keep the same day the disciples kept, Sunday, it has nothing to do with what the Roman Catholic Church did.
Okay, so then he continues on to say that the disciples kept Sunday. Well, no, they didn't. And we're going to take a look at this. So the Cut Hominy. And so this, as it says over here, is a curse upon heretics. So they brought this in the synagogue around AD 80 to 90, somewhere in there. They brought this in, and it was a prayer benediction to drive out the Nazarenes, the believers in Messiah. So they brought this in to drive them out. And And as far as the date, it says, pinning down its date figures prominently since it is widely taken to indicate the moment when the definitive rupture arose between Judaism and Christianity, as it says here. So over here on University of Massachusetts edu site, umass.edu, of this particular chapter entry from a book that they've cited here, and it's talking about expulsion from the synagogues. So around this time, AD 80 to 90, you have this expulsion from the synagogue of people who followed the Messiah, followed Yahshua. And so reading here, it says, the increasing insistence of some Yahshua followers on the divinity of Yahshua, their replacement of the Mighty One by Yahshua at many points, and their reading of the scriptures as prophecies of Yahshua were increasingly distasteful to those Jews who were not followers of Yahshua. And so they weren't replacing the Mighty One with Yahshua or by Yahshua. That was just the understanding of what was the thought. This tension reached a crisis when the Romans destroyed the temple, depriving Judaism of its sacrificial center. This presented Judaism with an ultimatum to follow its own universalist trend or to stay centered on sacrifice. The choice was for sacrifice. In the urgent process, preserving the temple cult and its associated Sanhedrin court in a diffused form, masterminded by Yohanan, other matters were put on hold. Some of those, quote, other matters were taken up when the new arrangement became more stable, and Gamaliel II became leader at Yabna around 80, so year 80 AD. This passage from the late but seemingly credible Babylonian Talmud tells us how the daily prayers were expanded by a new edition intended to deal with the problem of the Yahshua sect. Rabban Gamaliel said to the sages, "Is there no one who knows how to compose a benediction against the Menim, or heretics?" Samuel the Less stood up and composed it. For the apostles let there be no hope, and let the arrogant government be speedily uprooted in our days. Let the Nazarene, or Nazarenes, followers of Messiah, and the heretics be destroyed in a moment, and let them be blotted out of the book of life, and not be inscribed together with the righteous. Blessed are those, O Lord, who humbleth the arrogant. So they brought this benediction in, and so this basically caused the expulsion of the Nazarene, from the synagogues. And so all this time to 80 AD here, all this time, they're still going to the synagogue. They don't got these fancy churches. Do they meet at other times? Of course. They meet house to house and stuff like that, and break bread, fellowship, and talk about the gospel, and preach on the street and stuff like that. Of course. So to get into this, to keep into the synagogue, what they would have to do is they would have to recite this, and that they would have to say that they themselves be destroyed in a moment and be blotted out of the book of life. So this drove them out of the synagogues. But the point is that they weren't just going for evangelism, and they weren't keeping Sunday. They were still Jews. They were still in still in first century Judaism at that point. They just had some differing ways of going about it. And when we look at this over here as another evidence that they're still keeping Shabbats. Okay, so 405 AD, letter from Augustine to Jerome. For if we say that it's wrong to fast on the Sabbath day, then we condemn not only the Church of Rome, but also many other churches. So he's saying, so then Rome and other churches, they say they say to fast on the Sabbath day because, by this time, it started in the 300s, that they say to fast on the Sabbath day because they're trying to depart from the Jewish ways, as they called it, the Jewishness, but it's not the Jews, it belongs to the Father, the Shabbat belongs to the Father. That's what he says in Leviticus 23. Says it's his Shabbat. So, both neighboring and more remote, in which the same custom continues to be reserved. So the Church of Rome and others, they say to fast. And he says, and so then this letter from Augustine, he says, if on the other hand, we pronounce it wrong not to fast on the seventh day, so you feast on the seventh day instead, it says, how great is our presumption in censoring so many churches in the East and by far the greater part of the Christian world. So here in 405, Augustine is saying that the greater part of the Christian world doesn't fast on the seventh day. And so that means that they're keeping that day as a feast day. Okay, so they're keeping that day. They're not pushing away from that day like in Rome. So come down here, we'll look at this one too. You can look at those others if you want to pause. So this is Socrates, Scholasticus, late 300s to 430. For almost all churches throughout the world celebrate the sacred mysteries of the Sabbath every week. Yet the Christians of Alexandria and at Rome, on account of some ancient tradition, have ceased to do this. So right there is saying that almost all churches, except for Rome and Alexandria, almost all the believers, they keep the Sabbath. They keep the Sabbath. And that day, when they mention this in early writings, that day that they keep, what they mention Sabbath, it's never, ever Sunday. Psalm 89:34. My covenant I will not break nor alter the word that has gone out of my lips. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Comment down below. Comments of opposition are welcome. Just don't say anything dumb like you're not under the law or to grace because you've been taught to use that verse outside of the bounds of its intended context. Subscribe now. Smash that subscribe button and ring that bell so that you get notifications of all future videos.